My parents destroyed my house because I didn't invite them to my son's birthday party since they hate my brother's wife, but now I'm ruining their retirement dreams with a lawsuit. I get that it might seem like I'm the bad guy for what I did, and maybe some of you think it was way too extreme. But after everything my parents have done, I feel like they deserve it, especially for what they've been doing to my brother and for what went down at my son's birthday party. But before I get into all that, I need to give you some context so you understand how I got to this point. I'm 32, married, and I have a son who just turned 2. My brother is 28, and my parents are 59 and 57. I'm not about to say that my parents were monsters or anything like that. They weren't wildly abusive or anything like that. But they were always controlling, especially when it came to the big decisions my brother and I had to make. A simple example is when we were kids. They chose what extracurricular activities we should do. Even though my brother and I had our own interests, it was never entirely our choice. If we wanted to play sports or join a debate club, our parents would always intervene. They wanted to decide what was best for us, even though it often didn't match what we really enjoyed. It was never about forcing us to do something horrible, but there was always that subtle, constant control over our lives. That control became even clearer when it was time to choose a career. I'd always wanted to study graphic design. I loved drawing and working with design software since I was a teenager. But my parents weren't on board. According to them, that wasn't a serious career and wouldn't get me anywhere. They wanted me to study business administration or something more respectable. We sat down and argued about it a million times. They kept saying the same thing. Think about your future. Graphic design isn't stable. In the end, I decided to follow my gut and chose graphic design. Needless to say, my parents were not happy with that decision. For years, every time there was a family reunion or some event, they'd bring up my so-called bad career choice. They'd say things like, well, she's the family artist, so she doesn't worry about serious things, or, you still have time to get into something more stable. They reminded me over and over. But at least I knew I was doing what I loved. And when I landed a good job at a digital marketing agency and started earning more money than I'd ever imagined, they finally fell silent. Not that they apologized or anything, but at least the comments stopped because, well, money made everything seem more respectable, in their eyes. Things were a bit different with my brother. He was always interested in two fields, engineering and economics. Naturally, my parents loved the idea of him studying economics. I still remember the debates at the dinner table. My brother said he was seriously considering engineering, but my parents insisted that economics was the better choice. In the end, he chose what they wanted even though I know engineering was really what interested him more. I don't think he's bitter or anything because, after all, he was into economics too. I've always thought that if he hadn't been under that pressure, he would have chosen engineering. The real problem started about 5 years ago when my brother began dating a girl named Ashley. I'm calling her Ashley to protect her privacy. It's not her real name. When she was first introduced to us, there was absolutely nothing wrong with her. She was kind, smart, and clearly cared about my brother. However, from the start, my parents weren't on board. There wasn't any clear reason for it. They simply didn't like the idea of my brother having a serious relationship with her. I suspect it was because they wanted some kind of control over his personal life, even when it came to relationships. For a long time, they tried to influence him to break up with her, but when they couldn't, they eventually started tolerating her. Not because they really liked her, but because they realized my brother wasn't going to leave her. Things even eased up a bit when they found out that Ashley was studying the same major as my brother. That seemed good enough to them, as if that somehow validated their relationship. But everything changed a couple of years ago when my brother started talking about marrying Ashley. By then, they had been together for 3 years and were very serious. As expected, when my brother told our parents that he was thinking of proposing, they weren't thrilled. It wasn't that they were completely against it, but they weren't convinced either. They made it clear that maybe it was too soon, that he should wait a bit longer to make sure it was the right decision. It was obvious they didn't want him to marry Ashley. I remember my mom saying something like, "It's a decision for life. You can't just take it lightly," as if my brother hadn't been thinking about it for years. So one weekend, my brother and Ashley eloped to Las Vegas and got married in secret. They did it without telling anyone, not even me, which I admit hurt a bit. I would have loved to see my brother get married, but I also understand why they did it that way. With our parents involved, there would never have been a peaceful wedding. I found out later when someone told me, and even though it hurt not to be there, I fully supported them. I knew it was the only way my brother could have the wedding he wanted without our parents' drama. Since then, things with our parents have gone downhill. It's been almost 2 years since they got married, and my parents still haven't forgiven my brother. To them, it was an outright betrayal. They invite him to family events but always tell him not to bring Ashley. They don't acknowledge her as his wife, using derogatory terms like, your date, or, that girl, when referring to her. It's humiliating. My brother has stopped attending family events because of this, which I completely understand. The only time we've seen them together in the past 2 years was at events organized by other relatives, and every single time, my brother and Ashley left early because they couldn't stand my parents' comments. Now, all of this was bad enough, but what really pushed me over the edge was my son's birthday party. We had planned a small party in our backyard to celebrate, and of course, I invited my parents, my brother, and Ashley. But when my parents found out that Ashley was invited, they started making demands. They told me that if I didn't uninvite her, they wouldn't come. Their reason was that they couldn't stand being in the same place as her because, according to them, that woman has no respect for the family, and they'll never be able to accept her after what she did, meaning, marrying my brother without their blessing. I simply told them that if they didn't want to come, they didn't have to. In a bit of a sarcastic tone, I said something like, well, nobody's going to miss you, so do whatever you want. I wasn't going to uninvite Ashley. She's my brother's wife, and besides, I like her. There's no reason she shouldn't be at my son's birthday party. If my parents wanted to make a drama out of it, that was their problem, not mine, so they were uninvited. In the end, I wasn't expecting them to show up, but on the day of the party, to my surprise, they showed up uninvited. They even brought a gift, though it was clear they weren't happy. We put their gift on the table with the others, and I welcomed them. But as soon as they arrived, they started doing what they do best, opening their mouths to say something unpleasant. They began murmuring about Ashley, insinuating that she shouldn't have come because nobody respected their wishes. I confronted them immediately and told them that if they planned to ruin their grandson's birthday, they could just leave. My mom replied that they couldn't leave because they'd brought a gift. I told them that if they wanted, they could take it back. I didn't care. They fell silent then, though they separated into a corner, glaring at everyone. An hour later, I went into the kitchen to check on some snacks I'd put in the oven for the guests. What I saw left me frozen. The kitchen was filled with smoke and the food was completely burnt. The first thing I did was turn off the oven and pull out the charred snacks. But what really surprised me was that the oven was on full blast. I'd never set it to that temperature, and there hadn't been enough time for the food to burn that badly. And the strangest part was that my parents were gone. They had left, and their gift was also missing. It wasn't just the snacks, the walls were covered in smoke, and other things in the kitchen were ruined. We'll need to repaint since we tried cleaning and those stains just won't come off. At least the party wasn't a total disaster because my husband went out to get more snacks and everything went on as if nothing happened, but it could have been much worse. At that moment, part of me thought maybe it was my fault, that I'd been distracted. But another part started to suspect, could my parents have done this? After all, they knew I was busy with the guests. If they went into the kitchen and cranked up the oven to sabotage the food, it would have been easy. But I had no proof, at least not until I decided to call them. I recorded the conversation for evidence in case I decided to sue them. I casually asked if they had turned up the oven as a joke. At first I didn't mention the damage, hoping they wouldn't confess if they knew what had really happened. Then my dad, in his usual tone, replied, well, burning those snacks was what you deserved for not respecting the family's wishes. At that moment, my blood was boiling. I told them that their little joke had caused a disaster in my kitchen. So much smoke that the walls, curtains, and several objects got stained. Plus, it nearly caused a fire. I said I was ready to take this to the police since what they did wasn't just a joke, it caused real property damage. I was prepared to sue them and warned them that if they didn't want to ruin their future, they'd better be ready to face the consequences. My parents got defensive, but it was clear they were scared. They're on the brink of retiring, and a lawsuit or police trouble could ruin their plans. They still have a few years of work ahead of them, and getting fired now would be the worst thing that could happen. But the truth is, I don't care anymore. I'm determined to take this to the very end. I believe they've reached a point of no return, and I'm not going to let them keep interfering in our lives. So here I am, wondering if I'm the bad guy for wanting to ruin their future. I'm almost sure I'm going to report them to the police anyway, but I want to know, am I the bad guy if I report my parents and it leaves them unable to retire? Before continuing, don't forget to subscribe. New stories every day. Update 1. I'm really surprised by how many comments are supporting me. Honestly, I thought a lot of people would say I was being too harsh or that I took things too far, especially after reading other stories on this subreddit where even the most complicated situations sometimes end more peacefully. In my case, I expected at least a few to tell me I should try to resolve things another way, talk to my parents again, or that maybe I shouldn't have taken such drastic measures. However, the vast majority of you believe I did the right thing by reporting my parents and holding them accountable for what they did. On one hand, it was a relief to read your responses. Sometimes when you're so deeply involved in a situation, you can't see things clearly. Yes, they're my parents, and even though what they did was unacceptable, a part of me still doubted if it was right to take things so far. So, honestly, thank you for helping me see that I'm not crazy for seeking justice in this case. As I said I would, I went ahead and filed a report with the police. In the end, I don't believe my parents will suffer too much for this. It's not as if they intentionally set my house on fire, but what they did was serious enough for them to face legal consequences. For me, it's primarily a way to force them to confront the reality of their actions and understand that they can't keep doing whatever they want without dealing with the repercussions. When I went to the police station to file the report, the officer asked me some pretty detailed questions about what had happened. I explained that, even though the damage wasn't intentional in the sense that my parents didn't mean to burn my kitchen down, it was a direct result of their recklessness. I told her about the recorded conversation with my dad, where he pretty much admitted that he turned the oven up on purpose as a sort of joke. That was enough to open an investigation, although the officer did warn me that the case might not go very far legally. Still, I felt like I had done the right thing. On the other hand, I decided that I'm also going to sue my parents for the damage they caused to my house. What they did was completely reckless, and even though they didn't intend to cause major issues, it was a direct consequence of their irresponsibility. My lawyer explained that while the act could be seen as an accident, since they didn't intend to cause so much damage, it still counts as negligence. He believes we have a strong case, especially since my dad basically admitted he did it as a joke. Even though my parents never intended for things to escalate to this level, they did. When my parents were summoned by the police after I filed the report, everything exploded. I received a barrage of calls. They both called me at the same time and wouldn't stop. I could see the calls piling up on my phone, but I only answered my mom's call. It's always been easier to talk to her than to my dad, who is much more temperamental and hard to reason with. However, this time even my mom wasn't calm. As soon as I answered, she started yelling at me. She was furious and demanded to know why I had done this. She complained that the police had summoned them and that this could have serious consequences for them. She reminded me that they don't have much time left before retirement and that they still need to save enough money for a comfortable retirement. My mom insisted that they never meant to cause so much damage, that it was just a little joke because they thought I was being unreasonable for not uninviting Ashley. According to her, all they wanted was to show me that I wasn't respecting their wishes by inviting my brother's wife, someone they still don't accept. But frankly, that seems like a pathetic excuse to me. Even if their joke hadn't gotten out of hand, what they did was still aimed at ruining my son's birthday by messing up the snacks. What kind of person thinks it's reasonable to ruin their grandson's birthday just because they can't get their way? I told her that even if they didn't intend to cause so much harm, the fact is they did. And not only am I not withdrawing the police report, but I'm also going to sue them for the damages to my house. I told her that what they did was reckless and irresponsible, and I'm not going to let it slide just because they're my parents. At this point, I've been dealing with their controlling attitudes for far too long, and this was the last straw. To try and avoid a lawsuit, I offered a solution. If they were willing to pay me $5,000, I would withdraw the report and not pursue the lawsuit. That way, they could avoid the legal mess and just take responsibility for their actions without a court process. I thought it was a fair offer, especially since I wouldn't have to spend any more on lawyers or prolong this conflict. However, my mom immediately shot down the offer, saying that $5,000 was too much money and that they couldn't afford it right now. She insisted that they weren't in a position to pay that amount, especially with their upcoming retirement plans. But from my perspective, I wasn't asking for an unreasonable amount considering everything that needs to be fixed in my kitchen. Between the curtains, the smoke-stained walls, and other expenses, it wasn't out of the question. Before she could say any more, I made it clear. If they weren't willing to pay that sum, then I couldn't do anything for them. I would continue with the report and the lawsuit, and they would have to face the consequences of their actions. That's when my mom realized there was no turning back. She hung up without saying goodbye, and since then, I haven't received another call from either her or my dad. I've talked it over with my brother and with Ashley, and they both agree that this is the best course of action right now. They're also tired of their delusions and believe it will serve as a good lesson for them. Update 2. This time I'm not here to talk about my parents or the lawsuit. In fact, although the situation remains the same and the report is still active, I want to share something much more exciting. My brother and Ashley are having a baby. A few weeks ago, my brother called me, and I immediately knew he had important news. I'm going to be an aunt. The news of becoming an aunt made me really happy, but it also got me thinking about how my parents will react when they find out. Obviously, my brother isn't interested in telling them, and frankly, I'm not exactly dying to tell them either. But I can already imagine what they'll think once they hear. I can't help picturing my mom, sitting on the couch with her coffee and that permanent look of indignation, muttering something like, "A granddaughter, grandson of that woman." I'm sure that baby is going to be headstrong like her mother and won't respect our traditions. My dad, on the other hand, will probably be complaining that the family name is going to be lost because that woman is going to raise the child her way. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I'm pretty sure that thought will cross my parents' minds. And to be completely honest, I'm not sure how they'll really feel when they eventually find out. On one side, it's their grandchild, and I can't deny that, despite everything, they've shown some affection toward my son. But I'm also worried they might try to meddle in some way, even after all the drama we've been through over the years. As for the lawsuit, things are still moving along. The police report is active, and we've also sued them for $15,000. We don't expect to get that entire sum, obviously, but we're hoping to reach a settlement before the case goes any further. My lawyer says that we could probably end up with something around $5,000, which would cover the kitchen repairs and allow us to close this chapter without more complications. So even though the situation with my parents remains complicated, I'm focusing on the positive. My brother and Ashley are going to be parents, and I'm sure they'll be amazing. We've already talked about our plans for the future, and I can't wait for our kids to grow up together. Update 3. It's been several months since my last post, or maybe even longer, and I have to say, it's been exhausting in every way. Between the police report, the lawyers, and all the complications that came with it, I'm just worn out. For those of you who have never had to deal with something like this, honestly, I wouldn't recommend suing unless it's absolutely necessary. It's a slow, stressful process filled with moments when you feel like you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. In my case, although the outcome was relatively positive, I can't say I came out emotionally unscathed. At least the important thing is that we've wrapped it up and can start closing that chapter. Regarding the police report, some of you were probably expecting something more dramatic, like my parents ending up in jail or facing a harsher sentence. I'm sorry to disappoint those who had that expectation, but my parents did not end up behind bars. As I mentioned before, even though what they did was reckless, it wasn't something they did with the intent of deliberately setting my house on fire. It was a joke, so to speak, that went terribly wrong and, fortunately for everyone, didn't result in something worse. To me, it was clear that it wasn't just a simple joke, but I'm not the one who makes or enforces laws. What really terrifies me when I look back is thinking about what could have happened if the situation had been more severe. There were kids, my son included, and adults in the house when this all went down, and we could easily have been dealing with a tragedy. Luckily, we only had to deal with the destruction in the kitchen, which, although costly and annoying, didn't truly put anyone in danger. My parents, for their part, should consider themselves lucky that this didn't end with them facing more serious charges, because something much worse could have happened. In the end, the justice system decided that my parents didn't deserve jail time, but they did receive a symbolic fine of $1,000. It's not much, but at least it acknowledges that what they did was wrong and that there must be consequences for their actions. Honestly, I wish the punishment had been a bit harsher, just so they could understand the gravity of the situation, but at least there is some semblance of justice. Now, regarding the civil lawsuit for the damage to my house, things were a bit more complicated but also more satisfying in terms of outcome. As you know, I initially offered my parents a solution to avoid the legal battle: pay me $5,000 for the damages, and we could all save a lot of hassle. They rejected that offer, probably thinking they could avoid the problem or that it wouldn't have too many consequences. Well, it turned out that in the end, we ended up negotiating a deal that was much more costly for them. We finally reached an agreement where my parents had to pay me $7,000. That amount covered the kitchen repairs and my lawyer's fees, but it doesn't include the costs of their own lawyers, which probably cost them even more. It's a bit ironic when you think about it. If they had accepted the $5,000 offer from the start, they would have saved a lot of money and a lot of headaches, but they chose to push things further. In the end, they ended up paying more, and as usual, they suffered the consequences of their stubbornness. Part of me feels a bit of satisfaction seeing that they had to face the reality of their actions, but another part of me is simply exhausted by the whole situation. Honestly, I would have preferred to settle this long ago, but some people need to learn the hard way. Now, what I didn't expect was that all of this would have such a direct impact on my dad's work life. It turns out that because of the whole situation, my dad ended up losing his job. My mom, on the other hand, is still employed. And as I mentioned before, all of this could have been avoided if they had just accepted the original offer. If they hadn't insisted on being right, things would have been different. Now my dad is out of work, and although I don't have all the details about his current financial situation, I'm sure it isn't easy for them. However, I don't want this update to be all about family conflicts and problems. I want to share something positive and joyful because not everything in my life revolves around lawsuits and issues with my parents. In fact, I have incredibly exciting news. My nephew was born just 4 days ago. After all the stress and hard times, this news has been a ray of light for our family. My nephew was born healthy, without any complications, and both my brother and Ashley are doing perfectly well. My brother is over the moon with happiness, and I couldn't be happier for them. And yes, they all knew my brother was going to have a grandchild, but it didn't seem to matter to them. We haven't had any contact with them beyond the legal battles, and after everything that happened, some parts of the family have stopped inviting them to events, which is a relief for all of us.